we have two guests with us to have a brief talk back. I'm going to invite out the director, Josh Alexander, and the subject, Reverend Al Sharpton.
Thank you.
So first, I just wanted to. First, I just wanted to thank you all for coming, sharing your film with our audience, and being here for this conversation. We are so honored to have you. The movie is amazing. But I'm going to get right into it because we only have 30 minutes, so I want to make sure we can get through all the questions. The first thing I want to talk about is this concept of narrative and story. The film starts with a great quote about how history is both facts of the matter and the narrative around those facts. And then you give the great parable about the lion and the hunter. And whoever tells the story puts their own slant. So I'm really curious about how this story came to be, how this project came to be. Was this something that started with you, Josh, or how did this come to fruition?
Well, it was a little bit of both. So Kenar Massenberg, the former head of Motown, who's a very close friend of Rev Sharpton's as well, had been starting to put together a documentary on Rev Sharpton and his life and work. And at the same time, I had been researching to do a film on the Crown Heights riots. It was right after LA 92 had come out, and I realized that no one had really looked at that event since then. And as I started to look at that event and started to revisit that period of time in New York and Howard Beach and Bensonhurst and the Days of Outreach marches, it was impossible to look at that time period without seeing Rev Sharpton at the very center of it. And also kind of realizing that pre-cell phones and pre-videotapes of these events, Rev Sharpton was Black Twitter before Twitter existed. And so if you wanted to make a film that looked at the way that the narrative of race has been written in the media, you could do no better than go to the source right here. And so I ended up bringing the film idea to John Legend and Mike Jackson, who I've done a few films with. They brought us to Kenar brought us to Rev, and it happened.
And then
They came to me and Kenar and John Legend and said they wanted to do a documentary, not a bio, but to talk about how the media had dealt with us in the 80s and now how they were dealing with us now that the issues had become more, quote, mainstream. And I said, all right. And they said, you have no editorial control. They're going to do it the way they want to do it. And the director is a guy from Brooklyn, a little white guy. And I said, okay. And I said, that might be good so they can't say that I had control or that he was sympathetic. So I didn't know Josh. And to put all of that in the hands of a stranger who was much younger, but to say that I felt that we would take the risk of letting people see what happened. The focus of this that I think is so important is that the stories didn't change. The narrative didn't change. The way it was covered was changed. So when I was a teenager talking about this, it was outrageous, all the way to us getting arrested and stabbed and all, until now, when you get George Floyd and you start getting convictions and you start getting the president signing executive orders, now all of a sudden people take credit for those of us that's been doing this for many years. And right here in Philadelphia, you have had activists that have gone through the same thing. So one of the reasons I was glad, they've done about 3 or 4 screenings, but I made Philly is because Philly was one of those cities that had to deal with police brutality, and a lot of those activists didn't get their story told, so I wanted to bring my story to show that they should at least understand we were not hallucinating, this was real.
Right. And then just a brief follow-up, I'm curious, what was it about? I mean, this is a story of how media writes a narrative, but it is very much your personal story. What was it about Josh that made you be able to trust him with your personal story?
Who told you I trust Josh?
Hello.
I think that the way he would ask the right questions, I knew he was not just a guy looking to make a buck off of doing a documentary, sell it to somebody, and that was that. The questions were insightful, the way he handled himself, and then he came with, he did research that, to be honest with you, some of the footage I saw from years ago, I never saw till his film. I saw the whole film probably in its completion at Tribeca when it premiered. I never saw that footage of my mother till that night. I never saw that footage. My mother died 12 years ago. I never saw that. I never saw that footage of James Brown lying in his office. I don't, to this moment, know where he got that from. So some of that stuff, only somebody sincere would take the time to dig that up. Because it also said to me, if he could find it, they knew the footage was there. They were purposely saying, who is this guy doing all this? They knew I started in civil rights at 13, but they act like at 30 I was some new guy on the scene because they didn't want those issues raised. So I think his being sincere is what made me trust him with the project.
Also, for the first year and a half of us working together, periodically, my wife can attest to this, I would get a text from Rev Sharpton at any time of the day, any day of the week, and he'd send me a link to an article or a book or a film, and he'd say, read this, watch this, give me your analysis. And I would watch the film, read an article, I'd write these really, really long text responses back, I'd be sweating, and Rev would send a check mark, or he'd give me a thumbs up. And that was it, never said anything more than that. And I think he was just wanting to make sure that I was thinking about these issues and thinking about the history, thinking about the context, etc.
Well, you guys lead me into my next set of questions is about, this revisits critical moments in your political history, in your personal history, and I want to talk about the experience of taking a look back at your life. Was that something that you were eager to go back?
I didn't know, today I do 3 full-time commitments every day. Every day I wake up, I'm president of National Action Network. I'm host of a television show, Politics Nation, which we're going to end on time so everybody can get home and watch my show this afternoon. And I do radio every day, 6 days a week. I do call-in show. And that's aside from writing books and all. So I'm so much on what I'm doing every day that I don't really have time to stop and think about looking back. This film made me do that. And what made me sad is some of the people I looked at in that film are no longer with us. And then some of the people that were kids are now grown, so it gives me hope. And I spent a lot of time with my daughters. I have 2 daughters saying, you remember so-and-so? And oh yeah, so it's a lot of that that you just forget about. The one thing I'm proud of is everybody you see in that film, all the way back to Michael Griffith in '86, I stay in touch with their family. Every Mother's Day I call them mothers. Every Christmas I call, because it's still painful to them. I've gone on to become what I've become, but people have forgotten them. But I don't forget that there's an empty seat at their table. So we're all like family. And Mrs. Diallo comes and spends Christmas with us at the House of Justice. And I think that people forget these are human beings. I chose as a youngster to be in this movement. But these victims didn't choose to be in a movement. They woke up one day, their son was killed, their brother was gone. And I'm always mindful of that, and I always try to keep them in. So the difficulty for me was that when I look at that scene of me laying in the hospital when that guy stabbed me, I thought about all I could do that day was tell Kathy, who I was married to at the time, to call the babysitter, don't let the kids see, the girls see the TV, because I didn't want them to know I was stabbed. And they did. For 3 or 4 days, kept away from, the babysitter dropped, at that time they used to have Jet magazine, used to come out every week. She dropped the Jet magazine, and my oldest daughter, who was about 5 or 6 years old at the time, maybe a little older, 7 or 8, saw the Jet that I was stabbed, and she felt I had an asthma attack, and they had to put her in the hospital while I was still in the hospital. People don't understand the toll it takes on your family.
About yourself, and for Josh, did you learn anything, did anything surprise you or anything you learned new when you were doing the research and making the film about Reverend Sharpton?
I mean, so much. I learned so much. One thing that was a deep surprise to me from the very first time I started working with Rev Sharpton is how quiet he is. And I had to learn that his loudness was a product of necessity, not of choice. That was the first big lesson for me. But I learned a lot of different things. When I first started working on this film, one of the things I said to Rev Sharpton when we met, and I think this is what he was referencing before, is I had far more questions than answers. But I still grew up socialized by these narratives. So I still grew up with a very written perspective on who he was and what these events were. One of the great, Rev talks about the providence of the pandemic around these issues. One of the provident moments of the pandemic for us is we had just taken into possession 1,400 hours of archival material right when the pandemic started. And my editor and I were able to go and spend 3 straight months just watching footage. And I don't think I would have made the same film if I hadn't had the blessing of that opportunity to start to see the way that the media had started to paint these stories, write these stories, to see, one of the first things we saw was the Kairos-Chronos moment when Dr. William Jones talks about time and realizing that it's in Kairos that you see the structures and the systems. Racism wants to operate in Chronos, doesn't want you to get up above and see it. And we very clearly said, okay, this is the way we structure the film, is moving in and out of time.
I think the thing I saw was that the whole continuity of struggle and the different approaches we have crystallized when you watch it. Because there's never been one strategy, one way of doing things. There's always been those that have different paths, but we were going the same way, and we found a way to do that. And I think that that became something that I looked at in the film that I hadn't thought about. And I also think that I became more and more cognizant of the fact that I actually grew up in public. I mean, so, people look at you and say, oh, you changed, and I think Josh was right in having me say that I was, wow, I haven't changed. I'm the same person I was when Reverend Jones made me the youth director at 13. It's just you mature. Anybody that in the 60s the same as they were when they're 13, something's wrong with them. And I think that the other thing that I really thought about, that I didn't think about as deeply until I saw the film, is I didn't realize how fat I used to be. I'm serious.
So the first time you saw the movie was in the theater at Tribeca. So what was your initial reactions? And did you have family with you? And
oh yeah,
curious how they reacted.
I had everybody there. I had seen little snippets, and Josh talks about me sending him things. He would send me a snippet, like a 30-second snippet. He said, "Don't show this to nobody." But I knew it was a 2-hour film, so I'm seeing like maybe 5 or 6 snippets. That's it. But I had by that time trusted him. I trusted Kadar, and I had Spike Lee, Robert De Niro, everybody there. And I'm sitting there saying, I hope this thing don't go left. And it was fair. I mean, and I told him, it's your film. He put in the good cases from Yusef Hawkins to George Floyd. He put in the controversy with Tawana Broad. Put it all out there. Because all of it was really how the media dealt with it. Whether we ended up winning, losing, right or wrong on the case is how they had already prejudged not only the case, but how they were going to project us. Because if you watch the courtroom scene, which is also footage I had never seen, how do you just trample on people in a courtroom for just saying we're going to sit here until the judge comes back? and they violently eject us, and nobody fought back. The one thing you see in that film is the only violence in the film was against us. So then how do I get this image that I caused all this violence? The violence happened to us. But it's our fault. I guess, I went out there and threw my chest in front of a guy's knife. But that's how you have some people in this country believe, that we were causing all the trouble.
So do you think, is there anything missing in the film?
Well, again, I don't think it's a bio. There's a lot of bios, and I'm sure that there's a couple people talking about doing it now. But for what he started the film, which you appropriately quoted, to show the hunter and the lion, I think they didn't miss anything. I think they drove the nail through the wood there. The rest of the story of my personal life and the evolution, I don't think he was trying to tell, even though he told some of that. But I think that the aim that he told me in the beginning, he more than adequately did.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's well put together. But I'm curious, Josh, I mean, as an artist, you're always striving to be better. As you look at it, is there anything in there that you think you would have done differently, or?
This is only the 4th or 5th screening, so I think I'm still in a moment of humble pride a little bit around it. I mean, it's been an extraordinary journey to, we thought we were going to make a film about a very particular moment in New York City history, in this country's history, and then we would have this very thin layer about following Rev as an elder statesman in media and in politics through an election cycle, and then the pandemic hit. And the next thing I knew, I remember I woke up the morning 2 days after George Floyd had been murdered, when there were the riots in Minneapolis, and I checked Rev's Twitter, and he said, I'm on my way to Minneapolis. And this was like 7:30 in the morning, and the question then became, how do I get a film crew to meet him there by the time he lands? So it was a really powerful, humbling experience to be able to experience that summer through Rev's experience of it, and to have that privilege. And I'm still, I still feel very blessed and grateful for what we have up on this screen. Yeah, I'd like to do some more sound mixing. There's always little things that you want to keep doing. Films are never done, it's just when they finally get released.
And so I know this conversation is mostly about the film, but I feel like it's really hard to have you up here and not want to talk to you about, today and the current environment and your work. And so I'm just curious, how do you see your work progressing, changing, adapting with the current times?
I think that we are at a phase where the whole question of policing is no longer something considered extremist. The question of our saying that there's a threat to voting rights is no longer considered exaggerated. And I think that the question of inequality is not accepted. The question now is, can we legislate and change it? It is going to be very important what happens in these midterm elections, because it will decide the U.S. Senate and decide the Congress. We had a bill, a John Lewis voting bill, passed the House of Representatives, failed in the Senate because of 2 Democrats would not go against the filibuster. We need to correct that. George Floyd bill, we need to correct that. We did get Biden to sign the executive order. So we're right on the precipice of making fundamental change. We can win cases now. We got convictions in armed robbery. We got convictions in George Floyd. But now we need to change the laws. And I thank God I lived long enough to see us get here, but we need to get over to where the law changes. We're not going to change people's hearts, but we can change where they can legally put their hands and deal with it.
All right.
And that's the work that I'm going to do. And I'm glad to see this generation of young activists come on, white and black. I saw more white kids at some rallies than black on George Floyd. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's showing that people understand this. And it's not dealing with ageism. I tell people that the March on Washington in 1963, when Dr. King made the I Have a Dream, it was called by A. Philip Randolph, who was 72 years old then. The Million Man March, called by Farrakhan, he was 64 when he called that march. So there is no age in fighting the struggle. There's no day where I can get up and retire from being black. So I'm going to fight as long as I can, and then going to keep fighting even when I don't think I can, because you have no choice.
And so for people who want to make a difference, who might think that, how do I impact the legal system? Like, what do you have advice for people who are, everyday, ordinary citizens?
They should not only vote for the right people that'll stand up. Don't vote for just a party, but vote for people that'll stand up on these issues. Join a group or form one. As you saw in the film, I started my youth group, me and 5 guys. And when I left the Slave Theater, it was like 12 of us. We had $200 and $180 of that was the lawyer had. I had about $20 in my name. Start a group or join a group. Be part of a collective and pinpoint some specific issue you're going after in your neighborhood or whatever, and start there and build. They killed this young man that he shows at the end of the film in my neighborhood, a policeman, and I fought that case. Nobody heard of that case. We made it heard. So don't look to be grandiose. Start right where you are and build, and it'll happen. And change can occur.
Wonderful advice. And then, Josh, this movie, we're looking at, Reverend Al Sharpton's catalog of work, but I think it's still really critical in speaking to today. What are you hoping people walk away from when they watch this film? How does it fit into our current environment?
Well, Rev Sharpton and I have talked about this a lot over the course of making the film, but, race is a story, laws are stories, institutions are stories, structures are stories. So I think the thing that I would most hope that people take away from this is to question the storytelling and question the stories that you're being told. I think a lot, Rev and I talked about this as well, about Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail when he said the greatest inhibitor to change isn't the Ku Klux Klan or the white counselors, it's the liberal who's setting the timetable, etc. And I think that's one of the things the film shows is what was actually happening in the media center, the political center of the country around those issues. So I hope people, I know that it was an education for me. We talked about this outside, Robin, but when I first started looking at the aired stories around these marches, all of the racial epithets that were being screamed from the sidelines were bleeped out by network news. They were never shown. And so I grew up hearing how Rev Sharpton and these other leaders were being described as divisive, confrontational, causing problems, etc. But then everything that was happening on the sidelines was bleeped out. And I think this film is a corrective, it's a restorative, to actually see the work in action that had never actually been shown by the media at that time.
I must say this, because when I say starting a group or join a group, here's a National Action Network chapter here. I think some of the members are here, for those that want to join. Paula Peoples would kill me if I didn't say we have a chapter here of National Action Network. If you're looking for something to join, some of them are here in the audience. I'm sure they'll be in the vestibule at the end of this conversation.
Yes, awesome. So the film, it focuses primarily on your political work. We don't get to really see you outside of your career, and so I was kind of curious if I could ask, I'm really curious, how do you decompress? You have so many different things you juggle. What do you do to enjoy when you're not on the political stage?
Well, like I said, I've got minimum of three jobs a day. I really don't have a lot of time for a lot of other stuff. The way I really handle days, I get up every morning around 4, and I'm in the gym around 5, and I work out. And that's my day, that's my way of dealing with decompression and stress. Once I finish working out and bathe and shave, I'm on to the office if I'm in New York, on the studio or whatever I'm doing. And I think if you do what you enjoy doing, it's not work. Okay. So I'm not looking to, I'll be there when the job is over, I'll go see a Broadway play. I'm not looking to do nothing else. And because I grew up a boy preacher, I never did anything else. So if you grow up 4, 5, 6, 7 years old on the road as a boy preacher, what is normal to you? So people say, when are we going to do something normal? This is normal to me. And I don't try to be somebody else's normal. I'm comfortable in what I do. And I've always done it and I always will. It's funny, a friend of mine passed the other day, and somebody said to me, have you ever thought about who's going to preach your funeral? And I said, I don't know, I'm gonna think about that. And I called him back, I said, I just thought about it. I'm gonna record my own movie. I don't think nobody else could do me right.
Well, you're talking about your morning workouts. My coworker asked me to ask this, so I'm gonna do it for her. You're prolific on Instagram, and I love how you do the 3 morning workouts. I can't figure out how to navigate it, but can you just talk a little bit about why you love Instagram so much?
No, I'll tell you the honest God truth. I started a few years ago, and I took an Instagram picture with my workout clothes. And Jay-Z in one of his raps said, Reverend Al taking selfies, who's gonna help me? And I said, what is he talking about? Because he sometimes says good stuff, sometimes bad. That's Jay. And one of my daughters said, you ought to use that and do Instagrams when you work out in the morning. And it started from there. Now I got, I think on Instagram we got over 2 million followers, and people watch me do this every morning. And I go in the studio, in the gym around 5 in the morning, wherever I am. I do it from here because I'm going to Princeton and then back here to be at Bright Hope Church in the morning. And I'll do it from here. And it's just something I've done, but it just naturally evolved because of my daughter after what Jay-Z said. And I want to encourage people to get up and work out. I think people need to be healthy. I started changing my diet about 5 years ago, and in 2.5 years, I stopped eating meat, I stopped regulating with starches, no sugars. In 2.5 years, I lost 147 pounds. Never had an operation, no surgery. Just naturally. And I didn't do it because of the TV show. I had not gone on the TV show yet. I did it because I wanted to start taking care of my health. And you can't fight for everybody if you're not going to fight for yourself.
I have time for 2 more questions, and the first one is, how can everyone keep up with the projects if they want to learn more or have their friends see it?
The film was recently picked up in September by Greenwich Entertainment, which is amazing. They're one of the prestigious theatrical distributors. Very rare for a doc to come out in theaters. This film will be opening December 9th in between 17 to 50 cities. So get the word out. It'll then be available digitally in mid-January, and then we haven't announced yet, but it'll be having a very prestigious television and streaming premiere as well, but that hasn't been announced yet, but it's happening. But get the word out. It matters. Come to the theater, tell people about it. So.
That's amazing, that's exciting. I also wanted to make sure to leave a couple minutes at the end if there's anything else you wanted to share or say before we closed out.
No, I just think Josh is right. Get the word out. It'll be in 17 to 50 cities in theaters starting December 9th. And people should understand that Loudmouth was a strategy. People ask, why did he name it Loudmouth? That was a strategy. I wasn't born and start my journey in civil rights in Selma on Birmingham. I was in New York. And New York is Broadway plays and Statue of Liberty and Times Square lights. And if you wasn't going to be loud, you were going to be ignored. So I had to be loud to get their attention. And like he says, I'm basically a quiet person, but I could be loud to make them pay us some attention. We closed the city down, as you saw when we jumped on the railroad track and all, because they were ignoring us. And I said, I'm going to at least, that maybe is part of what I learned from James Brown with the actors. We've got to behave in a way they can't ignore us. And if we had to shut the town down, we got your attention now, let's discuss this.
Yeah, Rev had a great line, it's not on the film side. We did 14 hours of interviews, and there's some of the most extraordinary footage. I hope we can find something to do with it. But he said, we were talking about loudmouths and the history of civil rights and loudmouths, and he said, Jesus was a loudmouth. It was a crime then, as it is now, to be loud about sin and injustice.
See, I talked to no white boy about Jesus.
I just want to thank both of you again for coming and sharing the film and participating in the talkback. I want to thank you for your work and what you've done for the community. I want to thank you all for attending, and I want to remind you all that the film is eligible for an audience award. You should have received a ballot when you came in. You rate it on a 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. Just rip along the line where you want to score the film, and make sure to hand it to a volunteer as you exit the theater. I hope to see you guys at some more screenings. Let's give them one more round of applause.